So this is going to be Team Two's walkthrough of our LED alarm system. Um, Easiest way to go about this is to look at the code and show you how the code is interacting with everything that we put on this breadboard. But first we're going to walk you through the breadboard and everything on it. Here's our microcontroller, our Arduino, and this is where the code is going to be going through, and this is essentially going to tell all of this stuff how to react or how it's going to react. And then whether we depress on these buttons, it's going to tell the Arduino that, hey, this is what we're doing. We're trying to push in this code, and then the Arduino will decide, depending on what we put in the code, how it's going to react to that. So here's where it starts off. Here's our power in from our 5-volt going here, and then here's our ground as well. And so we have power in going to this 10K resistor. It's going to this Hall sensor. Now this Hall sensor, it reacts to magnetic fields. So as you can see right here, there's a magnet by it, and it detects that, and it can also detect that when this magnet moves away. Because of how we put it in the code, we're essentially simulating that this magnet is attached to the door, and this is probably attached to the door frame here. When someone opens that door, this alarm is going to go off, or this really scary LED, and it's going to let us know that there's someone entering the house. Right here, this yellow wire, these are all going to be inputs right here. So this yellow wire, I believe this blue wire is also an input as well. Same with this one. The Arduino doesn't know where anything is, so if we don't have these wires going into these digital pins right here, when we put in the code, we can tell Arduino that, hey, for pin 2, this is leading to our Hall sensor. So when we write the code, we could say, hey, we want you to tell this Hall sensor to do this. That happens to be in pin 2. There's our power in for that. Here's our 1K resistor going to our LED. Then our LED pin. This is going to ground, actually. Here's another 1K resistor. These are all set up the same, all these buttons. So they're going to have a 1K resistor attached to it, as long as a digital pin in, and also power in right here. And all of these resistors will be attached to ground. So, walking through this code here, up top here we're just initializing everything. We're telling the Arduino what is attached to our breadboard, what it needs to react with, or in our code we might be talking about button 1, and this way it knows that, hey, it wants me to do this to button 1 that happens to be in pin 4. So this is all this garbage up here. Here's our Hall sensor or LED, all 4 of our buttons. We also need to put up here our code set, or I mean our set code, which in this case is 3124, and also our Boolean function, which we'll talk about later. Here's our void setup. This is what we need. This is what the Arduino is going to run once. It's essentially going to, we're essentially telling it that the LED is an output. Everything else on here is going to be an input. And here's our loop. This is everything in this void loop is what the Arduino is going to run continuously. So in our setup, the way that we decided to go about this was to tell the Arduino that if our button is depressed, that it's going to print a 1 onto this serial monitor here. And this serial monitor is how we're going to keep track of whether someone puts in the correct code or not to deactivate the alarm. And we have to do this for each button. We have to say, hey, for button 1, print a 1, button 2, print 2, and so on and so forth. And we also need to give it kind of like a text length. So this way, where is it? It's actually right here. This substring right here, the code string. We're telling it that it's going to have 4 digits. Otherwise, someone might realize, hey, you know, like I put in the wrong code. It's going to try to input the correct code, and it's just going to go on and on and on and on forever, and he's never going to get there. So that's all that this is doing. Lost my train of thought. And here's where our Boolean function comes in. So this Boolean function right here is essentially going to read this as, once someone puts in the correct code, it's either going to deactivate or it's not going to deactivate if someone puts the incorrect code in. Here we're telling the Arduino what to do if the magnet is away. So essentially the Hall sensor, it's going to read as 1 on here. Everything on Arduino tends to read as a 1 or a 0. So this Hall sensor, when it reads 1, it's going to activate saying, hey, this magnetic field is no longer nearby. And if our code is false, the LED is just going to continue to blink. It's going to simulate an alarm is still going and the person hasn't inputted the correct code to turn it off. And this else function is just telling it to deactivate if the correct code isn't there. So we're going to go ahead and test this out. So here we have our magnet, and someone opens the door, moving the magnet away from our Hall sensor, and there's our alarm going off. And I'm just going to put in the wrong code. Let's do this nonsense. So as you can see, as I'm pushing all these buttons here, you see all these numbers popping up onto our serial monitor, and they're all the incorrect code. So therefore, since it's not the correct code, the Arduino says to keep the alarm going until someone puts in the correct code, which is going to be 3, 1, 2, 4. And the LED is going to turn off, which you can see right here was the last thing that we inputted. And the LED will turn off for 5 seconds. And that is it.